now look to Kerry-Anne Mendoza to continue the case for the proposition.
I speak as a staunch defender of liberalism. The ideas of liberalism, justice, equality, empathy, are not some academic exercise to me. It's personal. As a brown, gay, working-class woman, married to a woman of Jewish heritage, there are few places in the world where I could exist as freely as I do in Britain. And from history and from the egregious illiberalism of nations around the world today, I know what happens to people like me where the values of liberalism are absent. But liberalism is in danger. For at least the past 3 decades, the liberal project, as led in politics and the media, has become the preserve of privilege. A largely white, largely male, largely wealthy, medium political class have confused liberalism with centrism. Liberalism, if it is to mean anything, is radical. It seeks constantly to defy and dismantle attitudes, policies, and practices which restrict freedoms vital to full participation in private and public life. Centrism is a politics of relativism, as exemplified by the previous speaker. It looks to its left, to its right, considers both sides equivalent and extreme, and it pitches its tent betwixt the two. But when the Overton window is as far to the right as it is currently, this leads to self-declared liberals advocating policies and practices that are profoundly illiberal. UK liberals have hitched themselves to the socio-economic ideas of neoliberalism, an ideology which has served to increase inequality of wealth, justice, and the most basic of human rights. It has delivered a world where 8 billionaires hold between them the equivalent wealth of 3.5 billion people. That is half the population of the earth. It has delivered us a nation where between now and 2021, the poorest among us will see their incomes shrink by more than 10%, while the wealthiest will rise by 5%. We've seen the rise of a surveillance state and an all-out assault on civil liberties. From the 12th century's English Charter of Liberties through the Magna Carta to the Human Rights Act of 1998, civil liberties have been the central preoccupation of liberalism. Expanding rights from privileged groups to all, and restricting the rights of powerful groups to trample on the liberty of others. But during my lifetime, we have seen the dismantling of civil liberties, delivered and even cheerled by centrists parading as liberals. We've seen the legal period for detention without charge rise from 24 hours in 1984 to 28 days before it was reversed. From Thatcher's Public Order Act of 1986 to the Serious and Organised Crime and Police Act of 2005, the state has worked to undermine the right of peaceful protest. And I should know, because I was jailed and tried under SOCPA for peaceful protest twice. From the Interception of Communications Act in 1985, through the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act in 2000, to Theresa May's Investigative Powers Act last year, the rights of citizens to privacy has been washed away. Internet service providers must now store details of everything you do online for a year and are mandated to make it available to dozens of public agencies. This gives authorities unprecedented access to our online lives, our political interests, our networks of friends and family, our religious and political views, our medical concerns, our sexual interests, right down to the basic patterns of our daily lives. All of it passed with barely a ripple of dissent, while the ire of the so-called liberal elite was focused almost entirely on a resurgent left and right, the status quo, the apparent centre of UK politics, became ever more illiberal. And civil liberties aside, the equality of opportunity created by universal healthcare and education have also been eroded. The Labour Party, which came to power on the promise of education, 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 introduced tuition fees, creating an unfair barrier to higher education. The Liberal Democrat Party, which promised to reverse this by revoking tuition fees, came into power and trebled them. And the Conservative Party have increased those fees further still, while scrapping lifelines like EMA and other welfare programmes designed to increase access to further and higher education for the poorest among us. And the NHS is being crippled by constant reorganisations, PFI debt, and the outsourcing of critical care services to inadequate private providers. The crisis was epitomised by the Mid-Staffordshire healthcare scandal, which led to over 1,000 excess deaths for one hospital trust. Thirsty patients were left to drink water from vases. They soiled their beds because no one was available to take them to the toilet. And then they were left to lay in those soiled sheets for hours, all due to staff shortages. And finally, cuts to legal aid are moving Britain further towards a two-tier legal system in which justice is a privilege one must afford and not a right which every citizen is guaranteed. All of this has created a justified anger among the worst affected communities and a fear amongst adjacent communities that they are next in line. No, thank you. It has created fertile ground for right-wing groups and parties to cultivate that fear into a resentment for their chosen scapegoats. Immigrants, people of colour, LGBT people. The right have built a narrative that the liberal elites don't care about the rest of us, they don't care about the future of our kids, they don't care about the increasing poverty and destitution tearing our communities apart. And they are right and they are wrong on that. The elites who have hijacked liberalism have paid little more than lip service to the plight of those communities, but those elites have no place calling themselves liberal. Anyone who advocates the assaults on civil liberties, the economics of austerity, and the extrajudicial foreign policy of the war on terror has no place calling themselves a liberal. This is not liberalism, this is elitism. It is the preservation of privilege, not the radical advance of equality and justice for all. But this is not game over for liberalism. It's won over elitism, illiberalism, and fascism before, and it will do so again. In order for liberalism to reassert itself, it must become a grassroots movement. It must be radical again. It must feel like the natural expression of every person, regardless of their station in life. It must hold true to the principles of freedom, justice, equality, and empathy. And it must advance them in politics, in the media, in law and justice, and in foreign policy. In every classroom, lecture theatre, high street, hospital ward, courtroom, everywhere across the land. That way, liberalism will free itself and us from elitism. Thank you.